Hi, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. We're here in the AWS studio live from Amazon HQ in Seattle, Washington. And I'm here today to make a super special announcement. So Amazon Elastic Container Service for Kubernetes, or Amazon EKS, is now generally available. So joining me in the studio today are some of the team members that are responsible for building EKS. So I have Ishwar Bala and Brandon Chavez. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, great to be here.
Awesome. So first things first, can you tell me what Amazon EKS is for those of us that have not been on the preview?
Absolutely. So Amazon EKS is our managed Kubernetes service. So it's a service we built to make it easy to run Kubernetes on AWS. So we take a lot of the heavy lifting away from you in terms of provisioning the cluster, standing up yourself, making the right decisions about how do I pick the right instances to run the control plane, how do I set up the right security configuration. A lot of that, those decisions and that cognitive overhead we try to take away from you and make it much easier to get up and running much quicker.
So for those of us that have not been working with Kubernetes, can you give me like the 30-second overview on what Kubernetes is and why we went and built a managed version?
Sure. So Kubernetes is an open source container management solution that helps you manage containerized applications. If you're a developer, in addition to solving your writing software to solve the problem, you're actually handling orthogonal concerns like how do you provision your application, how do you scale your application, and how do you upgrade your application. All of that heavy lifting is actually taken care of by Kubernetes.
Because I think that for a lot of people, they've already been able to run Kubernetes themselves on EC2. So why manage? Is it just to get rid of some of the heavy lifting? Why are people looking for a managed version instead of just the do-it-yourself on EC2 version?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. So one of the things that we love to see is like there's a CNCF statistic that says that 57% of Kubernetes workloads run on AWS today. And that's before us releasing a service to help people do that. So there's a lot of enthusiasm and passion in the community today around running Kubernetes on AWS. And so we're really excited to be a part of that community, but also try to make it easier for customers to get up and running more quickly. So, this is a multifaceted thing for us. We want to build a service that lets you run production-grade workloads, but also contribute back to this community and, just really help people do what they're passionate about doing, which is running applications on Kubernetes. And we think we're on our way to doing that.
So I think part of what's important here is, so Kubernetes is open source. You can run it in a ton of different places. How do you go about making that kind of like Amazonian? So how do I do some of the things that I'm already familiar with in AWS, like networking and security and things like that? How do those fit in with EKS?
So we've written a couple of integrations. Actually taking a step back, we really want to let people use the open source tooling that they already know and love with Kubernetes, but at the same time be able to use AWS integrations in certain places with Kubernetes if they want to. So a couple of things that we've built in terms of like open source projects that are out with EKS today. First of all, we have a CNI plugin, which is the container networking interface. And that lets you get VPC IP addresses for your Kubernetes pods. So you don't really have to think about what networking stack you want to use. It's kind of provided with EKS for you. And then secondly, we've also built integration with IAM. So for authentication to your Kubernetes API endpoint, you can use IAM for the authentication portion, and then the actual authorization, or the auth-z component is through Kubernetes RBAC. So we've taken an approach that allows you to use AWS for some of this problem, and then native Kubernetes aspects for solving the other half of the problem. And we really like taking this open source approach and making sure that AWS integrations are available through community projects.
And I think part of the making it work with the community is, I think that one of the most popular questions is, can insert thing here work with EKS? So can I use whatever thing is thing here with EKS?
Absolutely, right? Like one of the core tenets for us in building the service is making sure that this is native upstream Kubernetes experience, right? Which means that we don't modify the Kubernetes we are running, right? It's vanilla Kubernetes, and we are certified conformant by the CNCF community, right? So it goes on to show that any tooling that you use on Kubernetes today would continue to work in EKS.
So for example, if you wanted to run like the conformance test yourself on an EKS cluster, you can go and do that today. So you can look at our pull request on the CNCF repo,
right.
See how we actually ran that test, run it yourself, and confirm that all the APIs that I expect to be there in Kubernetes are there on an EKS cluster.
So you said a magic word for me, which was conformance. So if I'm already running Kubernetes, how can I use EKS? What's the process like for me?
Yeah, so one of our goals, of course, by adhering to upstream is to make it as easy as possible for, if you're a Kubernetes power user already, you can bring that same expertise to EKS and make it work for you in the same way that you're used to Kubernetes working. So all your applications should run on EKS, no problem. And then, for those folks who are not super users of Kubernetes, we try to take a lot of the, heavy lifting of, how do I even get started? So you can click a few buttons, a few API calls, get a cluster up and running, and then start running applications on Kubernetes instead of focusing on the infrastructure underneath.
It's a really interesting balance, right, between being able to keep what people value about the Kubernetes community and their tooling and the open source part and the third-party resources, and also, but make that AWS on top of that.
Right.
So I want the AWS part, but also the open source part.
Yeah. So we're super proud of what we've achieved here, right? Like, for example, we launched the CNI plugin by default, right? But we don't restrict you from using just that particular CNI plugin, right? If you're comfortable with using your own tooling on Kubernetes, right, you're free to use the CNI plugin that you want to use, right?
So if you're just joining us, by the way, just announced the general availability of Amazon EKS, so the managed Kubernetes service. If you're hanging out in chat, there's a bunch of moderators from AWS that are here answering some of your questions. Keep sending their questions, and we'll have we have Ishwar and Brandon answering questions now. We'll have guests answering the rest of the time today. So keep sending the questions. I think the moderators have gotten some of them. I think kind of on the really important side, though, how do I get started using EKS? So how does it work? How can I use it? How do I build stuff?
Well, we'll talk about it, I guess, at a high level here, and then Ishwar does have a demo for us that kind of walks through a lot of that. But there's two options in the very standard AWS way. You can use the console, or you can use the CLI or the SDK. And so, the first thing that you would do is you would create an EKS cluster, which is actually the Kubernetes control plane, right? So we provision all of the control plane instances for you across multiple availability zones. You tell us, for example, what the name of the cluster is, what version of Kubernetes you want, which subnets in your VPC should we connect into, which IAM role to use. So there's some configuration there. And then after that process is done, you launch your EC2 worker nodes, and those run in your account. So the control plane is completely abstracted from you in our accounts. EC2 instances that act as the worker nodes are normal EC2.
And that helps with things like high availability, which I think has traditionally been not the easiest thing with Kubernetes, right? Is that how can I make my whole infrastructure highly available?
Right, yeah, we're absolutely focused on making sure that that EKS is by default HA, and that's the only way you can get it today.
Yeah.
So I hear quite a few people in chat chattering about price, but once more for the people in the back of the room, what does pricing look like for EKS?
So EKS is priced at a flat rate of 20 cents an hour for the control plane. So when you click Create Cluster, you start getting charged at 20 cents an hour. And then EC2 instances are the exact same price that you would pay for normal EC2. So your cluster charge is a combination of that 20 cents an hour, and then EC2 instances and whatever else you create, load balancers, EBS volumes.
So I have a question from Twitch. So Argals00 says, what's the default CNI plugin in use?
So the default CNI plugin is AWS Amazon CNI plugin, right? You're free to if you want to use other net plugin providers like Flannel or Calico, you're free to use that as well.
Right. So our VPC plugin is it's on a GitHub repository. It's open source. You can go take a look at it. It's the AWS VPC CNI, and yeah, it should be linked out from our documentation, which should be live at this point too. So go take a look. And we are absolutely welcoming contributions, pull requests. If you find any issues, cut an issue on the repo. We like to think we're very active on there.
Yep.
Yeah. So if you're following along remotely, all of the EKS stuff should be going. All the supporting things like documentation should be going live right around this. So this was the official announcement. So. Things like documentation should already be up and running pretty soon. Cool.
Yep.
So over the next hour or so, we have members of the EKS team. So they'll be here showing us about how EKS works and how you can use it and get started. So stay tuned. Keep hanging out with us. We'll be at twitch.tv/AWS. Right now, coming up in just a couple of minutes, Ishwar is actually going to walk us through a demo on starting our first Kubernetes cluster with Amazon EKS. So we're going to take a quick break right now while we get Ishwar all set up, and we will be right back. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to our Amazon EKS live stream launch announcement extravaganza. It's demo time. So in case you missed it, Amazon EKS, a new managed service from AWS to make it easy to run Kubernetes on AWS. So Kubernetes, open source software for running containers and microservice-based applications. So here in the AWS studio with Ishwar Bala, so he's the senior manager for software development for Amazon EKS. And he's going to walk us through the steps for setting up a Kubernetes cluster with Amazon EKS. So Ishwar, take it away.
Thank you, Abby. So I'm here to demonstrate a couple of things here, right? So the first thing I want to show is the user experience of creating a cluster in EKS, right? So I'll go on to create a cluster, and then I'll go on to demonstrate how this is just native Kubernetes upstream experience, right? So I'm going to use Helm to launch an application, and we'll go on from there. So I'm right here in the AWS console, and we have our EKS service right there. So that's the cluster page you're seeing, right? So I have a couple of clusters already launched over here. So let's take a look at one of the clusters I've launched. So if you look at this, you get to see the actual API server endpoint that you have to be using in order to talk to the Kubernetes cluster, right? In addition to that, we also provide you the certificate authority data that you have to provision. You have to put it in your kube config to be able to communicate securely with the Kubernetes cluster. So having seen that, let's go on to create a new cluster. All right. So we're looking at the create cluster page right now. And before I go on to create a cluster, I want to actually talk a little bit about the background so that the parameters here make sense. So usually when you launch a Kubernetes cluster, the Kubernetes control plane and the worker nodes reside in the same VPC. But we are doing something very unique over here, right? So in EKS, we manage just the Kubernetes control plane, so which means that the masters are completely abstracted away from the customers. And they're run in our service account. And the customers would end up creating the worker nodes and connecting it to the master endpoint that we provide, right? So in order for the Kubernetes control plane to control the resources in customer's account, the Kubernetes control plane needs to know what is the VPC and the subnets the customer resources are actually running in, right? So that's what you exactly see here, right? So you provide a cluster name. So I'm going to call it Wonderful Willy. So we actually support the very latest Kubernetes version in 1.10.3. So that's that. We ask for a role arm because Kubernetes needs permissions to control the resources it's going to provision inside your cluster, right?
And ARN, by the way, is an Amazon resource name, and that's your unique identifier for everything in AWS.
That's
so
correct.
How do I? Everything has one. So from load balancers to security groups to EC2 instances.
Yep. So prior to creating a cluster, I've already created a role arm using the policy that we have in IAM console, and I'm going to pick that particular role arm here, right? So that's my role that lets Kubernetes control plane control my resources, and then I'm going to run my workers in my VPC, which is the VPC I've created already. And as soon as you create the VPC, you actually see that the subnets automatically get selected over here, right? And then you can also provide the security group, which lets you control how the control plane can actually reach out into your worker nodes. So I'll go ahead and create the cluster. All right, so the cluster right now is creating. Instead of waiting here for the cluster to come up created, I'm going to use one of the already created cluster for the subsequent demo. So I'm going to use the elegant Einstein cluster over here. Let's go back to the terminal now. I will.
Answering a couple questions from Twitch, by the way. So people have been asking about regions. The mods have been answering this also, but right now it's in North Virginia and Oregon. I have a question from Twitch, by the way, about traffic between Kubernetes nodes. Will you be able to see that in VPC flow logs?
Yes, you will be, because
Okay.
It's just traditional ENI that we connect, and you'd be able to see all the VPC related stuff in the flow logs.
Awesome.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. So here you see the kube config that I'm used to communicate to the cluster, right? So that's my server endpoint that I get from here, and the certificate authority data is from here as well. The one thing I want to point out here is the use of the HEP2 authenticator. IAM is the only way you can authenticate into an EKS cluster. So we've actually collaborated with Hep2 Authenticator and worked on it to be available in the GA timeframe, right? So now that you've seen the config, so I'm going to quickly show the nodes that I have running. So I have 3 worker nodes running. So I'm going to go ahead and set up some RBACs and service accounts so that I can go ahead and install Helm onto my cluster. So I'm going to set up a service account so that Tiller can actually use that account to control and manage the application installs into the cluster.
For those of us that are less familiar with Kubernetes that are watching on chat, can you explain a little bit about what Helm and Tiller are?
So Helm lets you. So Helm is a software that lets you install applications into your clusters easily, right? Think of Helm as a package manager for Kubernetes, and Tiller is the server-side component that actually runs in the cluster, and Helm, the CLI, talks to Tiller so that it can provision and install applications and update applications.
Awesome.
So there we have the service account created. I'm going to apply an RBAC policy for the Tiller. So that's created as well, right? So now we are actually ready to go ahead and install Helm onto our cluster. So Helm is actually getting bootstrapped into the cluster. So it's going to take a bit for it to come. Okay, it's actually running right now. So just for a quick sanity check, we're going to see the version running. So we're running 2.9.1 of Helm right now. Okay, so now that we have actually have Helm set up, we are ready to go ahead and install the application I'm going to do. So what I have right now to show is a WordPress application that's going to get deployed. It's going to use a database backend, which is going to provision an EBS volume, and then provision a load balancer so that you're able to hit the WordPress site. So I'm going to create a namespace to install my application. So I've created a namespace called WP for WordPress. And now I'm going to install the Helm application. So here what I'm doing is I'm actually asking Helm to install WordPress chart and then put it in the WP namespace. So there. So it actually went ahead and installed the chart, and it's actually bootstrapping that particular application. So these are coming up right now, and it's going to take a while for it to come up, and then provisioning the load balancer is also going to take a few minutes because the DNS needs to propagate. So to quickly demo, I have another cluster which I've set up where I've set up exactly this particular application, and we can quickly see the application right there, right? So that's a demo I wanted to show to you. Yeah, and that is all I have.
Well, that's not all because we have questions from Twitch.
Yeah.
From Twitch, from Jay Jeskins, can you use Spot Fleet for the workers? And I'm going to extend that question and say that can I use any instance type that I'd like to for the workers in EKS?
Definitely. So the worker nodes is all in your account, and you're free to bring any worker instances you want to bring in.
Awesome. Second question from RHAILLE. I don't know how to say some of your Twitch usernames, guys. It's actually kind of hard. Is anyone planning to talk about Ingress services and how EKS could work with AKS, with ALB and maybe CloudFront? Do you want to talk at all about Ingress?
Yeah. So we are actually working on a couple of projects to make sure that the Ingress controller is able to use all the ALB features that we have, right? So we are currently working with both CoreOS and also Ticketmaster. Yep. To getting these ALB to put some effort into these controllers.
For those of us that are a little bit new, can you explain what Ingress is in Kubernetes?
So Ingress lets you. So when you launch a service inside Kubernetes, these services are available only inside the cluster, right? Some of the services you do want to expose it to the external world. So Ingress controllers lets you do that, right? So when you provision an Ingress controller, it's going to use the load balancers that is available in the cloud provider and connect your services onto that particular load balancer.
So I would say that not a specific question. Here's one. What about GPU instances?
You're actually free to bring in any instances that AWS supports, right? So GPU instances are supported as well.
So I think that's what we were trying to get earlier, right? It's bring whatever instance type you'd like. They're your worker nodes to run and provision as you wish. So things like GPUs, fine. Spot Fleet, fine. The world is your oyster here. Use whatever instance type floats your boat. The mods are working fast and furious over here. Talking about different kinds of load balancers are supported. We just answered the GPU question. I think a lot of people have been asking about how can they get started beyond this. So can they use tools like COPS to help provision? We showed the console. We showed the CLI. What are my options if I'm looking to sit at home and get started with EKS? What options do I have available to me?
So today you can come to console and CLI, use the CLI to actually provision and operate a Kubernetes EKS cluster. You can also use CloudFormation to actually create a cluster and do the operations on it. For now, COPS doesn't support creating an EKS cluster, but it's something that we are actually actively working with the community to make that possible. We are also working with other partners so that support for EKS cluster creations available in other provisioning tools as well.
Can you talk a little bit more about the Heptio authenticator, and that's from BitValues on Twitch?
Yeah. So the Heptio authenticator, originally started by Heptio, helps using IAM identities to authenticate into a Kubernetes cluster. So since the project got open sourced in the community, we've actually invested quite a bit of effort to add more features into it, to make it stable, and to be able to offer it as part of our GA effort, right? So using Heptio Authenticator, you'd be able to use your IAM identity in its configuration and operate on any of the EKS clusters.
I think a really nice theme here is working on AWS integrations in partnership with other community members.
That's
so
right.
Instead of just us building things by ourselves, working with other members of the community to help build things together so that it not only does it work with AWS, but it fits what the community is looking for.
That's exactly right.
Cool. Yeah. I've seen a couple questions hanging out in there about versions and how to handle major and minor version upgrades. Can you tell me a little bit about that with EKS?
Yeah. So if you notice in the console, when I went to the cluster page, right? So let's say, for example, the create cluster page. So what you see here is just the major and the minor, right? But when you go to the create cluster, you can actually see what is exactly the version that we offer right now, right? So it's 1.10.3. We will be taking care of automatically upgrading your clusters into the patch version. Like tomorrow, if there's 1.10.4, we'll automatically take care of upgrading that for you. For the minor version upgrades, let's say 1.11, you will have control on when and how you want to upgrade the cluster.
Awesome. So opt in if you want to. You have the option. If not, you can set your own version and not opt in to minor version upgrades.
That's exactly right. Yep.
So if you're just joining us, we are live demoing the launch of Amazon EKS. It's now generally available. Keep hanging out, asking questions in the Twitch chat. We'll have Ishwar for another 5 or so minutes, and then we'll be up with something else. But keep asking questions. Keep chatting in the Twitch channel. There's a bunch of moderators. People are getting all their questions answered about. Okay, so I think so. Stylish Hobo. Is Code Pipeline going to add support for EKS? And I think more generally, people are looking for questions around kind of extra tooling, like on the AWS side. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So making sure that other AWS services integrate with Kubernetes is actually a very high item in our roadmap, right? So we are continuously working with other AWS service teams to make these integrations possible, and it's definitely in the pipeline for us. Yeah.
And then extending that question a little bit, what about logging with CloudWatch?
That's something that we do want to support. So today you don't get the master logs into the CloudWatch account, but that's something that that we are working on right now. So.
Yeah, so I think in general, lots of questions around logging and metrics. Someone says that they saw my Honeycomb IO sticker. Yes, I have a great sticker collection. New laptop though, so less stickerish than the previous ones. How we do a lot of our roadmaps, though, is based on what people like you are asking for, right? So just generally available starting today. Keep passing back your feedback, what you're looking for, the integrations that you'd like to be supported. That's how we do it. And someone, I think, is asking about Terraform support. I think someone said in Twitch chat that they had already seen a PR open for Terraform. So Terraform's like lightning. So check back on the PR. So keep sending the logging options that you want to use, the integrations that you want to see. It sounds like a lot of them are up. People are asking about additional region support. It's always the question, right? And then we do new regions as quickly as we can.
Exactly right. Today we are available in IAD and PDX, and other regions are definitely in our roadmap as well. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
Someone's asking if I can tell them about my love for my new laptop and USB-C. I have no love for USB-C. I have so many dongles now, it's the worst. Follow-up question from Twitch, is there support for spot instances? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Any kind of instance you want, GPUs, spot instances, it's your workers, your choice. Okay, so we are just about up out of time with the demo. I had a follow-up question. Are we responsible for scaling the cluster, or is there some magic around auto-scaling Kubernetes horizontal versus vertical scaling?
We definitely take care of scaling the masters for you, right? So you don't have to worry about anything related to the masters. But for the worker nodes, you are responsible for now. Yeah.
And can you use auto-scaling groups the same way that you would?
Absolutely, right? So in fact, the CloudFormation template that we provide today to make it easier to create worker nodes sets up auto-scaling groups for the instances today.
Awesome. So things that work with regular EC2 instances, any kind of instances that you want to support, they work fine with your workers. The same with the open source tooling that you're already using for Kubernetes. We talked about that a little bit a couple minutes ago, but will insert thing here work with EKS? The answer is yes. So keep using all the tools that you like. Keep using the instances that you like. Someone is asking about, are there going to be webinars or meetups happening around EKS soon? And great question. Stay tuned. I think lots of people want to talk about it. We want to hear you talk about it. We want to hear you talk about what you've been building with it. Yeah. So yes, things will be coming soon. They just posted in the chat. There'll be one at the San Francisco Loft on June the 11th. So also coming up soon. So stay tuned. Awesome. Well, Ishwar, this has been great. Thank you so much. Next up, we're going to have the CTO of GoDaddy, Charles, here in the studio with us. So we'll be taking a quick break, and then we'll be right back to talk about how GoDaddy runs Kubernetes and how they're using EKS to move their Kubernetes workloads to the cloud. So we'll be right back. Keep hanging out on twitch.tv/AWS. So welcome back. So we're here live from Amazon HQ talking about the launch of Amazon EKS. It's now generally available, so the Elastic Container Service for Kubernetes. I'm joined here in the studio by Charles, the CTO of GoDaddy, here to talk about running Kubernetes on AWS and how GoDaddy is using Amazon EKS to move from running infrastructure in their data centers to the cloud. So Charles, welcome.
Thank you.
So first things first, can you tell us a little bit about what GoDaddy is and what they do?
So GoDaddy is a place where people go with new ideas, new businesses, new initiatives to basically build their online presence. So they buy domain names from us, they build websites with us, they host email, they can even do bookkeeping with us. We are one of the largest providers in most of those categories. We have about 17.5 million customers, 76 million domains, millions and millions of websites, through tools such as our own GoCentral website editing tool, as well as managed WordPress.
So that's keeping millions of websites on is no small feat. So how do you do that? Where are they all hosted?
So right now, all of our infrastructure is on premise, and obviously we are going to be moving a lot of that to Amazon as a cloud provider. Today, if I use just the simple example of managed WordPress, that's something that we really focused on how to make that experience easy for our users to manage multiple sites, and so we're using containers for that, and obviously making sure that we are both time efficient with our customers' time, stepping through the common steps really efficiently, as well as making sure that it's fault tolerant and available is something that we've focused a ton of our time on.
So I heard you say that you were running with containers, and I believe you guys are using Kubernetes. So why did you choose Kubernetes?
So we standardized on Kubernetes a few years ago. We think it's a great open source, reliable, robust tool chain for deploying, scaling, and managing applications, and it's something that we have been using broadly across pretty much everything we do. So it's something that we feel pretty comfortable with.
So I think you recently made an announcement that you are moving the majority of your workloads to AWS. So why are you taking that step? What challenge is that solving for you and your customers, and why AWS?
Yeah, so some of the biggest challenges for us are deploying all of our services in global locations around the world. So Amazon obviously provides a lot more there than we'd be able to do on our own. I think we also have a high level of respect and trust in Amazon's ability to deliver reliable services. So I think when it comes to things like EKS, integrating well with things like elastic load balancing, IAM, VPC. These are all capabilities that we're able to leverage for our customers without basically spending all of our time doing the nitty-gritty of the infrastructure work.
So what kind of tools are you using to work with your Kubernetes clusters?
So, we basically built our own internal Kubernetes management system, which is no trivial task, as I'm sure that Amazon has found, but has also worked through leveraging. We use a lot of other tools, whether it be Prometheus, FluentD. These all work easily with Kubernetes.
So you've been able to use your same tools like Prometheus and FluentD with kind of regular upstream Kubernetes, and you've been able to use the same ones with EKS.
Yeah, that's right, and I think that's one of the big attractions for us about both working with AWS on Kubernetes and the migration itself is that this is a fairly seamless move for us. We basically gain capabilities, and AWS takes care of the management of the infrastructure, and we can basically move transparently to our customers and to most of our internal teams.
Just adding, not taking anything away.
That's right.
And I hear that you guys contribute back to the Kubernetes community as well.
Yeah, that's right. So we both have client libraries, a Node.js library. We're also working with folks on continuing to push the envelope in terms of scale for Kubernetes. That's an area where I think we run some of the largest production clusters of Kubernetes, and we're certainly interested in continuing to see that number grow, double, triple, and on.
I think that's a really important piece of EKS, exactly right. So we have Nisha Davidson. She's a manager for the EKS team's open source integrations in the studio today. So she's going to join us in just a minute to talk about kind of how the team is contributing back to Kubernetes projects and other open source projects to make AWS a really great place to run containers and also a great community member. So what's the bottom line for you on why you're running Kubernetes with AWS EKS?
Well, I think at the end of the day, Amazon provides a global scale and a commitment to continuing to innovate in the space. We've also found the interactions to be really positive in terms of taking us as a customer, the feedback, and incorporating it into the product. I think also leveraging the pure, unadulterated open source upstream version and allowing full community participation is also just a strong commitment to the open source project.
Right. So where does GoDaddy go from here? So what are your plans for the future with AWS and EKS and GoDaddy?
So we're obviously going to be busy for a few years migrating our infrastructure to AWS. So that's a significant amount of effort, but obviously we get a lot of benefits in that process. At a broader scale, digital identity online is shifting to mobile, to different forms of social media, and that's something that we need to adapt to. So we're also spending a lot of our time focusing on AI and ML techniques such that we can better understand our customers and how to make them successful. And as I mentioned before, just continuing to work with the Amazon team in terms of contributing to the upstream, the open source project, especially when it comes to scale.
I think that's so important too with Kubernetes, right? That you never want to lose the community aspect of it and the contributing back to the greater community, because I think that's part of what it's made it so powerful.
That's right.
Awesome. Well, Charles, thank you so much for your time. I'm super excited about what GoDaddy is building on AWS with EKS. Right now, I'm going to have Nisha Davidson joining me in the studio to talk about the work that AWS is doing with the Kubernetes community. So we will be right back in just a second. Charles, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So welcome back. So this is our live stream on running Kubernetes on AWS Elastic Container Service for Kubernetes, or EKS. That's a lot of acronyms for me, so bear with me. EKS is a new managed service from AWS that makes it easy to run Kubernetes on AWS. This is our live streamed launch announcement. So we've been here with Charles from GoDaddy talking about their implementation. We've seen a demo. We've done a little bit of an intro. So I'm here in the AWS studio in Seattle with Nisha Davidson. So she's working on container open source engineering. She's the manager for open source on the AWS containers team. Nishi, thanks for joining me.
Lovely to be here. Thanks, Abby.
So we're talking about open source right now, which I think is one of the most important parts to me with Kubernetes, around Kubernetes and the community. Can you tell us a little bit about what your team is focused on?
Sure. So first of all, I have the best job here. It's an exciting place to be at. And if I were to talk about the community, anyone who's been part of it, we go by the mantra, chopping wood, carrying water. And staying true to that mantra, I think the first important element for the team to work on is upstream testing and also documentation. That might sound really lax, but it's actually a very important tenet of making sure that the community work moves at a very strong pace. So today, all the Proud tests are all running on GCP infrastructure. We want to make sure that there's enough coverage for Amazon and there's enough stability upstream. As a second tenet, a lot of my colleagues talked about the integration of the Kubernetes API with the core AWS services, and they brought up Hefty Authenticator, whereby AWS IAM credentials can be mapped to Kubernetes RBAC credentials. Other examples were brought up, like CNI plugin, which allows you to do cluster networking inside of Kubernetes. A third example was an ALB Ingress controller, which is also an important project that we are contributing upstream to. There have been other asks in SIG AWS in terms of making EBS driver compatible with CSI interface, as well as actually introducing some form of nodeless designs into Kubernetes. So the integration with core AWS services is an important tenet of the work that we want to focus on. And last but not the least, as we gain more karma upstream, we also want to do some design level thinking that we introduce into the community, specifically around the scheduler, etcd, and the core API.
Something that I really like from hearing from your team around that is the chopping wood, carrying water. So kind of the not always the glamorous sides of open source, but how does documentation get up to date?
Yeah.
How do all the little things happen? I think it's really great to see. Not only are you working on that, but it's it's literally the first tenet is how can we basically be good members of the community?
Right.
For those of us, we have some Kubernetes newbies, by the way, on chat today. Can you explain what a SIG is?
Sure. It's actually a special interest group, and essentially you can form a working group inside of Kubernetes where, as members of the community, you can discuss an idea, come up with a proper design, and then if there's enough involvement from the community members, customers, and partners, then you can actually ask the steering committee or another SIG to sponsor a special interest group, whereby you're saying that you're committing code and you're also being responsible for maintaining that particular code. So we are very active members of SIG AWS, and it's also linked to the cloud provider SIG, which has just been formalized. The idea is to make sure that AWS, as a member of the community, has an opinion around certain services that require integration with the Kubernetes API. So a SIG is the right forum to bring up all these design aspects, to contribute code, and also to bring any type of change that you want to introduce into the community.
So something that I think is really important here is the tight integration with AWS. So there's a whole SIG around it. So people are obviously looking for things like AWS integration. Can you talk a little bit to what people are looking for and why that's important?
Right. So I gave an example of the Hefty Authenticator, which just makes it easy for any AWS IAM user to not worry about Kubernetes RBAC or authorization or access in any new form or manner. That is soon going to become a sub-project under SIG AWS. So if people want to contribute and become part of it, all they have to do is participate with us and just be part of it and highlight any issues or bugs that they might have and make any pull requests. So another example would be the ALB Ingress controller. We have an opinion as Amazon. We have different partners who have different solutions. We go to the community and we figure out what is the right design where we should introduce a sub-project into SIG AWS. That's also going to happen. So basically, we're creating a forum where people can come, discuss their ideas, and talk about what design works the right way or does not work the right way. So as we do the work on the EBS driver, that also will become a sub-project under SIG AWS, if that's a good enough example.
So it's a combination between how can I use my open source tools, but also how can I get the benefit from some of the other AWS services that I'm familiar with, so things like VPC and IAM and load balancers and things like that.
Exactly, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about why open source is important for AWS? Because I think we've been seeing that become more and more of a loud part of the strategy recently.
So Kubernetes is all about open source, right? There hasn't been such a vibrant and open environment. I feel so energized and surely grateful to be part of this particular community. Also, open source is important to our customers and partners, right? We just had Charles talk about how they are involved in the open source community and how they can actually benefit the community by giving us some of their scale tests, which we hope and plan to work on. So essentially, the idea of open source is there's benefit to our customers, there's benefit to our partners. And to give you some key examples of integrations that we are doing because our customers and partners asked for it, apart from the scale testing example, is the EBS driver, which actually was introduced by Portworx as an ask. And we're now paying more attention to it because it was brought in the community. A second example would be the nodeless design discussions that we've been having. Virtual kubelet was actually worked on by one of our customers, Contentful, and then we worked with them in order to introduce a PR to that particular design. So this is why open source is extremely important. It's an open forum. We work on ideas, and then we take forward an idea that has the most traction.
Can we talk about virtual kubelet for a second? Because sure. I know we have some newbies. So what's virtual kubelet? How did it kind of come up? You talked about Contentful. How do we get involved? What's the status right now?
So virtual kubelet is just a design approach to solving a problem. Essentially, we want to introduce the idea of nodeless clusters into Kubernetes. And we believe that we are at least introducing the idea that virtual kubelet could be an option to get there. But we have been working with the community, and we will approach the problem in a way where a Fargate-like design can be introduced into Kubernetes. And that's the whole context behind virtual kubelet.
Why is nodeless important? So why is that kind of a design concept that we're looking at? Why is that like a long-term kind of project? Why nodeless?
I think some of our customers, because we are obsessed with customers, some of our customers have introduced the idea that it's kind of cumbersome to think of all the worker nodes that they might need at any given point in time. They don't know how to plan for things. So in many situations, as an example, they have a Jenkins cluster and they want to expand the cluster, the test cluster, contract it as and when they need it. They might want a cluster which has GPUs, but they don't want to keep it active and running at all given point in time. Or they might just have on-demand traffic that they can't plan for. For these scenarios, yes, you can figure out a way to auto-scale your cluster, but it would be nice if Kubernetes introduces the idea of resourcing rather than having a strict one-on-one mapping to node, and hence we are looking at this particular aspect.
I think a lot of people, the same question comes up around Fargate too, which is what's kind of the next step? And it's, why not everyone wants to manage all of their infrastructure, right? Because they have other things that they can focus on and they can prioritize other things. So why focus on provisioning worker nodes or EC2 instances when really all you wanted to do was run the container?
Exactly.
If you're just joining us, by the way, so this is the live stream of the EKS launch. So we're here talking with Nisha Davidson, who's on the open source team here. So she's managing the containers open source projects. So I have a question from Twitch right here, as soon as I can figure out my window, asking around Terraform. So it said Terraform just released an operator for EKS, and the comment was, those people are quick. Absolutely. Can you talk a little bit about Terraform and EKS?
So that's a difficult question for me to take because I haven't looked at the PR, so I have no idea what they released. I'm guessing that it allows EKS elements to be picked from Amazon and then scheduled onto AWS so that you can auto-start an EKS cluster, but we'd have to look at the PR and then comment on how it works, whether it covers all the functionality. Knowing the Terraform guys, they must have done a terrific job. So I'm guessing the functionality of the PR should be to allow Terraform to work like CloudFormation and set up all the elements of EKS cluster.
Different ways of provisioning nodes ultimately. So some people use CloudFormation, some people use Terraform, some people write their own.
Use whatever configuration management tool you want.
Yep. I think that's a good theme for AWS too, and I think we see that with some of the open source contributions. Is that we want you to be happy and successful running your containers.
Exactly.
So if you like an open source one, yes, Some people want to use IAM. Yes, we want you to be happy using whatever tool works for you. So can you tell us a little bit about what you think is next? So how our customers are benefiting from some of this upstream work, and also you gave some kind of high-level tenets that we're focusing on. What do you see as kind of being next, and some specific problems that you think we're going to focus on?
Right. So I think I did touch base a little bit on it. I'll add some more color to it. So SIG AWS is going to be an important forum for us. We're going to add sub-projects there that we think need to be maintained on a regular basis because they're important to EKS. It's also important to our customers per se. I think it's relevant to also customers who want to continue using Kubernetes on EC2. As a second element, I think there is a lot of work happening in the community whereby cloud provider-specific code is being removed from the code base, and there's a push to run end-to-end testing. So there was a SIG that just got formed, Cloud Provider SIG. We want to be very supportive of the idea of making the code base, sort of removing very provider-specific elements from it and making the code base as seamless as possible. We want to add some elements of security and scalability upstream because we expect EKS to be a wildly successful service. And from that success, we want to derive lessons that we learn in terms of sizing, in terms of how applications perform and scale. And we want to help the community gain that particular knowledge in collaboration with partners like GoDaddy. And fourth element is we want to actually work with thought leaders in the community and contribute all the best engineering talent that we have in AWS that we are known for, but we're not very good at marketing and positioning. So hopefully, nodeless design, but also with the work that we end up doing on the core API, on the scheduler and etcd, we can establish that leadership and contribution that we want to be part of.
So those of you that are following along on the chat, by the way, the mods are posting links to things like the SIG groups and the user groups and some of the PRs that people have been talking about. So follow along on chat and you'll be able to keep up with what Nisha is talking about, but follow along the link on your computer. So part of what makes open source so valuable is the community and the people behind it. So you mentioned these thought leaders and these SIGs. How can I start building some of these? How can I get involved? How can I help?
Great question. I'm glad you asked. First things first, I really would request everyone to be part of SIG AWS and continue to participate and contribute as best as you can. Please at least show up. It at least gives us an idea of what types of problems you're having and helps us prioritize the projects we work on. The second thing, of course, is we are hiring big time and we want to be a huge contributor to the community upstream. So if anyone is interested, please ping me and we would love to have you as part of our organization.
We'll put Nishi's contact info in the Twitch chat also. So if you're looking to talk with her specifically about her team at AWS, that's an option. But I think the important thing, what makes these communities so strong is you put your money where your mouth is, right?
Exactly.
So if you want to have a voice in how Kubernetes drives itself, the same actually goes for other Amazon services, right? Is that we base our work off of the voice of others. So let us know what you're looking for. Let us know the integrations that you're looking for.
Exactly.
Join a SIG, join the cloud provider SIG, join SIG AWS, open PRs.
Create as many issues as you can.
Yeah.
We would love it.
We love issues. We love compliments also. But issues and compliments, all fair game. But get involved. And it just doesn't have to be for us, but get involved with the regular Kubernetes community as well.
Exactly.
I think it's really great, by the way, seeing us not only try to take on some of the leadership roles, but also take a secondary supporting role in a lot of these too. So
that's true.
If you got to a cool plugin first, and we just want to help you make it work well.
Exactly.
Awesome. So I have one follow-up question.
Sure.
Why are some of these tight integrations kind of so important? So I know that people are looking for things like IAM and VPC and load balancing. Why did people go out and write plugins for things like this? Because a lot of that, you can get really similar functionality in Kubernetes. Why are people looking for the Amazon-specific version?
So first of all, Amazon is a huge cloud provider. The demand that we have is huge. Second of all, we all love Kubernetes because of its flexibility and the number of options that it provides for anyone to actually work with the API and create their own solution. Having said that, I'm just referring to the topic that came up in KubeCon 2017. The main topic was Kubernetes is boring. Now it's all about the application, which goes to some of our topics on Nodeless and the conversation there. I think for many customers who have already decided that they're going on Kubernetes, right now all they want to do is use it really well and have someone's opinion to say, this works, just focus on your application. So I think it's very important to have all the flexibility and all the options, but at the same time for EKS to provide one single path so that our customers can focus on what's important, which is actually containerizing their application and running their application reliably on AWS.
I have a question from Twitch about what about running a service mesh like Istio? Is that possible on EKS? Will I be able to use tools like that?
So again, thank you for bringing that up because that's a priority on our roadmap as well. We haven't figured out when we could actually do that work, but it is something that's important and on top of our minds.
So ongoing focus and effort, I think, on working with other projects, other members of the ecosystem in the community.
Exactly.
We want you to have a good experience running Kubernetes and AWS, however you choose to run it. So Nishi, thank you so much for your time and all of the work that you and your team are doing to improve the Kubernetes ecosystem and make AWS a great place to run your containers. Still in the live stream, we're going to take a short pause. And then when I get back, we'll be talking to Bob Wise, who's the GM for Amazon EKS, and Deepak Singh, who's the Director of Compute Services at AWS. So stay tuned at twitch.tv/AWS. We will be right back.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Welcome back. This is our live stream on running Kubernetes on AWS with Amazon Elastic Container Service for Kubernetes, also known as EKS. So EKS, we just announced it, general availability today. It's been in preview. New managed service from AWS that lets you run Kubernetes in AWS. Kubernetes, if you're just joining us, open source software for running containers and microservices-based applications. So I'm here in the AWS studio in Seattle. I'm here with Bob Wise, GM for Amazon EKS, and Deepak Singh, who is the Director of Compute Services at AWS. Bob, Deepak, it's great to have you here.
Great to be here.
Great. I've been working on Kubernetes for a long time. This is a very exciting day for us.
Bob also wore the most appropriate outfit today, which is he's got the T-shirt and he's got the patch. So he came prepared for lunch today. Just a quick note, by the way, for everyone in the Twitch chat that's asking about, obviously, swag for stickers and T-shirts. There are Amazon EKS stickers. If you're at a Loft event or a meetup or a summit, we promise to have Amazon EKS stickers for you. So good news, positive answer. So first things first, can you recap a little bit about what EKS is and what we've talked about so far on the stream today?
Well, we talked about a lot on the stream today. Just the main recap on EKS, it's our newly announced managed Kubernetes service, upstream, managed, conformant, easy. We've been going through demos. We've had lots of Q&A. It's been a great intro.
Awesome. So I know that people have already been running Kubernetes on EC2 for quite a while. I think we've talked about it. I know I've talked about it. You've talked about it. Why did we build a managed version?
This is really easy. Our customers wanted us to do it.
That's the answer to everything here, by the way.
Our customers love running Kubernetes. They love, well, maybe I should say it differently. They love using Kubernetes. Actually, running Kubernetes is a little bit more challenging. You can get Kubernetes up and working on your own initially really pretty easily, but keeping it running, maintaining it, keeping security, patching, reliability, backups, restores, all these things are the kind of undifferentiated heavy lifting that AWS is really, really good at, and our customers wanted us to do that for Kubernetes.
I think there's that Monzo quote that floats around all the time, and I'm waiting for them to send me a cease and desist letter for using it so often, but I like it so much, which is, I think the thread here is that people really like the result and that they don't necessarily like some of what AWS calls the undifferentiated heavy lifting. So it requires quite a bit of work and research and getting really familiar with how Kubernetes works internally in order to be really certain about things like high availability and backups and stuff like that. So AWS has another container service, so Amazon ECS. So how do I choose between the different orchestration options?
Great question. In many ways, it's great that we have multiple options. In fact, I like saying if tomorrow some other container service becomes really popular, we'll be busy figuring out, and a customer is asking for it, we'll be busy figuring out how we can support that. So ECS has been around for 3 years, when GA, I think 2015 in about April. And we have tens of thousands of customers launching hundreds of millions of containers every week. So that ECS will keep growing as a way, especially if you're very familiar with doing APIs the AWS way. You like the tight integration across the board. And for those customers, ECS is always going to be a great option. It's also an option that sits underneath many of the services that we build, batch being a great example. On the other hand, we all know how popular Kubernetes is. It's why our customers wanted us to build a managed Kubernetes service. And for customers who want to use Kubernetes, who want the option of starting in their own data centers, maybe running in multiple places, EKS is going to be a great option. And the fun part is we know there are customers who are going to use both, depending on the team, depending on the application. The great part is both will evolve based on what the customer base for each wants. They may diverge in some ways and be the same in other ways. So it's going to be great seeing how things evolve. And from an AWS perspective, if you combine the fact that there's so many customers using EC2, and we also have a serverless offering, Lambda, and customers are going to use mix and match one of the others. It's going to be great fun.
I get that same question a lot at smaller events like summits, and people are like, well, how do I know which one is right? And there's no wrong answer. It's your infrastructure and it's your workload, so use whatever works for you, or use a combination. Use all of them.
Yeah, and it's entirely true that in some applications or some use cases, one might be slightly better than the other because our customers take us in that direction and they latch onto that. Batch is a good example, but who knows? Yeah, and that's a great place to be, and we let our customers drive us in the direction they want to.
So I think the next follow-up question that often comes with why are there multiple orchestration choices is now that EKS is here, what will happen to ECS? Will it just disappear into the ether?
No. As I said, we have a very large customer base that has a roadmap. I know we have a roadmap list that's pretty long on features that they want us to build, and we'll keep doing that. I also think that our customers are evolving in how they think about the container space. I think some customers are interested in, we talked a little bit about Nodeless with Nisha earlier, is how can I evolve from container orchestration to the thing I like saying is nobody ever asks us which rack your EC2 instance is running in. They just want to run their containerized applications, and they want us to take care of that. They can come through the ECS APIs if that's what they like doing. They can come through the EKS APIs over time. Something we are super interested in supporting. And as technologies like Service Mesh, which we also briefly just discussed, evolve, will be right there trying to figure out how to make sure it gets supported across the board with AWS, and we'll, all of it will evolve over time. Who knows? 2 years from now, we may have something else that people want us to support.
So it's not just about different orchestration platforms and how you want to orchestrate your containers. It's about what does the long game look like? Okay. People don't think about regular compute the same way that they used to. So they're not going to think about containers the same way in a couple of years either.
Yeah, and we see it today, like how people think about packaging containers, how people think about, a year ago, I don't think people had barely heard the word Service Mesh, and 6 months ago at KubeCon, that's pretty much all anybody talked about. So,
literally all presentations on Service Mesh.
This world moves really quickly. Our job is to work with our customers, understand what their real pain points are, and see how we can eliminate them.
So something that I think has been really interesting to kind of follow the progress on, and that you spoke about at the State of the Union for containers at reInvent, was changing about how we thought about primitives. Yep. So things are moving from at the EC2 level to at the container level, and I think that's been really cool to watch the kind of the evolution through Kubernetes and ECS and EKS on how things started being supported at just the container level and not necessarily having to take a step back out to EC2.
Yep, and I think it's pretty. Today, when somebody is building a microservices style application, there's a very strong chance that they're starting off by thinking about containerizing it. And it is helping us think through about not just the container part, but how the rest of the AWS ecosystem evolves to support them.
So speaking of kind of Kubernetes versus EKS, if I have an existing Kubernetes cluster and I want to import it into EKS, so just announced general availability today, what are some things that I need to think about? Sure.
Well, first of all, EKS is Kubernetes. That's our hosted version. So I would never say it's.
I just softballed that one in for you. You're welcome.
Exactly. Thanks very much. The first thing you should think about is how we're going to be helping you with your operational loads. So your pager is going to be going off a lot less frequently. That'll be the first thing. And then the second thing will be you still have to concern yourself with the same things you concerned yourself with before, but it's going to be more of the do I have the right kinds of nodes in my cluster? Do I have my taints and tolerations set up properly? Do I have IAM configured? Maybe if you're switching from self-hosted Kubernetes onto EKS, maybe you're using an overlay and now you use our CNI. But those, for the most part, it should be super easy. Those are all decisions you can make as you go.
I think a theme here is because it's just, as you said, regular Kubernetes, all of your tools and the does thing work on EKS, there's all the same. So It should not be a whole lot to think about.
And if you're just joining, you should go back and watch Ishwar's demo. He launched Helm. He just installed some stuff.
It was awesome. So if you're just joining us in the stream, we've been streaming for just about a little over an hour now. Announcing general availability for Amazon EKS. We've talked with Charles from GoDaddy, so one of our customers, about their experience with Kubernetes and EKS. We saw a demo by Ishwar showing how you could get started setting up a Kubernetes cluster with EKS. He used Helm and Tiller. to set up a WordPress site, really snappy. And then we just spoke with Nisha Davidson about AWS and Kubernetes and the open source community ecosystem. So it has been an action-packed hour. And now we're going to get Bob's perspective on open source tooling and partners with Kubernetes. What's kind of the ongoing support plan? What do you think is next? How are we working with the existing Kubernetes community? Because I think that's such an important part of this.
Well, Nisha covered quite a bit of this already. I'd like just to emphasize that the reason to have Kubernetes by itself there's no point to it, right? The reason you have something like that is because you're going to run things on it. You're going to develop software to run on it. And in the Kubernetes community, you have to be conformant. You have to work with all the partners, with all the other people in the open source community to ensure that if you can run your thing on Kubernetes anywhere, you can run an EKS. And being part of the upstream community is really key to ensuring that we continue with that.
So I actually have a question that is, I think, for both of you at the same time. So trying to get more exciting. I'm going to ask both of you the same question. So we talked about...
Do we buzz in?
Boom, phone a friend. So I know we talked about virtual kubelets and nodeless, and then, so I want to talk about that and how we see that direction, but then I also want to talk about how Deepak sees kind of the evolution of compute, because I like to ask Deepak that at least twice a year to see what's happening.
Twice.
And then I steal it all for my talk. So both parts. So both kind of the Kubernetes specific part with EKS, and then what we see kind of next for compute with Kubernetes, and then more generally from Deepak. Ready, set, go.
Bob first.
Bob first.
I took easy way out.
Sold Bob out.
One of the really fun things about being involved in Kubernetes is how fast the community has moved forward on a bunch of really amazing things. And I think we're at the early phases of trying to figure out how does Kubernetes and these kind of nodeless concepts fit together. And so that's why we're working on this in the open with a bunch of other folks, is trying to figure out what's actually a pretty hard problem to sort out these kind of different paradigms. And I think that like many things, there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all kind of answer. There's going to be reasons why you're going to want to use one model and reasons you're going to want to use another. And for a long period of time, you're going to want to mix all of those things together to solve. Like, real applications always have lots of different kinds of pieces to them, and you want to use the best tool for the job.
I think we talked about it a little bit earlier, but it's a really hard problem in general, is to get kind of the best of everything. So the open source, the community, but also, what if I don't want to manage my own nodes? What if I don't want to manage things like security and ingress and load balancing? Like, how can I get the option to have whatever path that I want to take? I think it's a harder question, I think, than people when what it looks like right away. It's actually like a big and complicated problem that has a really different answer for everyone.
Right.
So Deepak, how do you see kind of what's the next big challenge for building kind of modern applications? What do you think is next for compute?
The way I like thinking about this is, EC2 has been around for 12 years now. So about as long as I've been using it. And what EC2 brought to you was the fact that you could take a very familiar, 30-year-old concept, a machine, with an operating system, and you could programmatically spin it up, spin it down, and you pay by the drink. And that was what made EC2 as successful as it has. But EC2 has evolved into supporting everything from machines with, I've lost track of how much memory we put on them, to 8-volt GPUs. But I think one of the most interesting parts about containerization and the kinds of applications and the way containerized applications are managed is that they have intent, some level of intent in how you want to run your application. This is defined in pods and task definitions. It's defined in your schedulers and the behavior that you want your schedulers to have. But it's still sort of just starting to scratch the surface of what that means. I fundamentally believe that we will be able to, because we know we have better signals on intent, then be able to leverage things like machine learning, our knowledge of, especially as AWS, where we are operating the entire infrastructure, of how we can then give our customers the best experience without them making explicit choices. More and more customers will move towards making implicit choices on what their application should behave like and how they want, and then it is our job to make sure that we provide them the best experience possible. That's on the higher up the stack. On the lower up the stack, that means that you need much, much more finer grained options. And you don't want people to think about even how many, over time, how big my container should be. I mean, that's what serverless does so well. And I think we learn a lot in the container space from serverless, and I think the serverless people are learning from containers. And it's a symbiotic relationship where we're going to go towards very, very fine-grained sort of per 100 millisecond don't pay for idle type of compute with intent on the higher up the stack, which means at the end, as service providers, we can give you a great experience on exactly the kind of applications you want to run with the quality of service that you want. And this is, again, this is, who knows, it might take 2 years, might take 20, but I think that's definitely where computing is headed, and we're starting to see the signs.
I like seeing both the choice that comes out of it, and then also making stuff that used to feel a lot more difficult and just making that more accessible. Like if I want to really fine-tune a cluster and I didn't previously have like the time or the engineering resources to do it, just making it accessible for me to have that choice, I think is incredible.
Yeah, and it's one reason why we have so many choices, because I think if any of us knew what the right answer was, we'd be lying. Like, there's many answers, and at some point there'll be some convergence, potentially, but who knows?
I feel like the right answer too is what works for you. And that's why you end up with things like choices, and maybe I want to choose something explicitly, but Deepak wants to rely on some sort of sensible default, or Bob wants to write his own and bring his own worker nodes, and I don't want to manage them. I think the right choice is whatever works for you.
Yeah.
So we are just about out of time on this launch live stream today. Been really great seeing all the questions from Twitch and the audience. We've had some awesome guests today. If you've been watching and hanging out on Twitch, some of the moderators will still be hanging out to answer questions. I know that they've been posting links to documentations and SIG groups and meetups. So stay tuned. Definitely feel free to keep asking your questions. We're here to help. A thank you to all of our presenters and our production crew that helped put this live stream on today. And a very special thank you to all of the EKS team for working so hard to build such a great service. So thank you to all of our customers, from developers to operations folks to CTOs. We do this for you each and every single day, and everything that we build is for all of you. We're really excited to bring you Amazon EKS. If you want to get started with EKS, you can go to aws.amazon.com/EKS. You can join us in person June 11th at the Loft for the AWS Ecosystem Day. We'll be talking with partners and customers and presentations. I think I'll be there. It will also be on Twitch. I'll be a real person, not a Twitch person this time. So we are signing off the air right now, but we'll keep answering your questions on Twitch. And we will also be on Reddit at the AWS subreddit with a live Ask the Experts session. So a few of our speakers that we heard today will be presenting on more EKS subject matter and answering questions and hanging out. So go there for all of your questions on getting started. Thank you, everyone, for joining our launch live stream today. It's been a pleasure to launch EKS for you. So thank you again, and goodbye. And we will catch you in just a little bit. We'll be talking with the Neptune team. So stay tuned at twitch.tv/AWS. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.